guys, so today we're learning something called morphing, which is how to factor equations that start with a number in front of the x squared, for example, something like 2x squared or 3x squared. And in order to learn how to morph, you should already know how to do basic factoring, where the coefficient in front of the a term is 1, or factoring things that start with x squared. And we'll do some review, and if the review is hard for you, I'm going to be making a video on normal factoring soon, but normal factoring is pretty straightforward, and I think morphing definitely is really helpful. A lot of schools don't teach it, mine did, and I thought it was a lot easier after learning this. So now let's move on to the review. So our first review problem is going to be to review factoring x squared plus 5x plus 6. So in order to factor an equation where the coefficient starts with 1, you want to think of two numbers that multiply to the last number, so 6, and add to the second to last number, or 5, the number in front of the x. And for this one, it's pretty easy to figure out that those numbers are going to be 3 and 2, because 3 and 2 add to 5 and multiply to 6. So then you just do x plus one of those numbers times x plus the second number, and it's pretty straightforward. We're going to do one more review problem that's going to be a little bit harder, but it's going to be the same idea. Again, if these are hard for you, I'm going to make a video on how to do more basic factoring next week, so stay tuned for that. So here, I'm going to be factoring x squared minus 4x minus 12. And again, we want to, since the coefficient for the a term is 1, we just want to think of two numbers that multiply to 12 and minus 12 and add to negative 4. So again, a negative times a positive is going to be a positive, so I know one of them needs to be negative. And so I decide that negative 6 and 2 would work because that multiplies to negative 12, and we add negative 6 and 2, we get negative 4, and then again, just slap each of those behind the x for each term, and you've got the equation factored. Now, just to explain why that works, again, the last two numbers are going to be multiplied together, and that's going to get you your c term. So for example, when we multiply 3 and 2, we get 6. When we multiply negative 6 and 2, we get 12. And then the two x's are each going to be multiplied by one of the n's, so we get, when we add those together, that's how we get the original equation. But now we're going to learn how to factor if the a term is not 1, if there's something in front of the x squared, and this is called morphing. Again, the coefficient is just the number in front of the x's. So now we're going to get into our first example. I'm going to give you two examples, and then I'm going to put some practice problems in the description that you guys can practice on. And if you guys want, I can make a video going over the solutions to those. So the first example we're going to go over is factoring 2x squared plus 7x plus 5. So with morphing, it's actually going to be pretty similar to the method we just went over, just there's a few extra steps. So our first step is going to be multiplying the a term and the c term, which is just the number in front of the x squared and the number at the end that doesn't have any x's attached. So in this case, 2 is in front of the x squared, and 5 is in front of the x, and for that we get 10. So our next step is going to figure out two numbers that multiply to the a times c and add to the b. So two numbers that multiply to 10 and add to 7. So just like with normal factoring, you do have to think of two numbers that multiply to something and add to something. The only difference is you're multiplying to a times c instead of just c like you normally would. So now the two numbers that jump out at me are 5 and 2 because they multiply to 10 and add to 7, so that's what I'm going to use. Now, step 3 is going to be to split the b term into two parts. So what that just means is that those two numbers that add to the b term, which in this case is 5 and 2, we're going to split the b into that. So in this case, we're going to split the b term into 5x plus 2x. And sorry you can't see this part, my camera's a little off. But we're just going to make our equation 2x squared plus 5x plus 2x plus 5. So the next step is going to be factoring, but when we're morphing, you actually factor a little bit differently than how you normally factor when you're just doing something with an x squared coefficient of 1. So in this case, we're going to factor into two different parts. And that might seem a little confusing, but it actually is easier than normal factoring. You're just going to take out the greatest common factor of the first two numbers and multiply by the rest of them, and then do the same with the second ones. So for example, the greatest common factor of 2x squared and 5x is just x, and then 2x squared is 2x times x, and 5x is 5 times x. So that's where the x times 2x plus 5 comes from. I just did that with the second pair of numbers 2. So 2x plus 5 actually don't have any greatest common factor. So for that one, it's just 1 times 2x plus 5. So next, moving on to step 5, and this is going to be combining. So the really cool thing about MARFing is that this, if you MARF correctly, this combine step is always going to work, which I find really cool. So you're just going to take the number inside the parentheses for both parts should be the same. So in this case, the number inside the parentheses for both parts is 2x plus 5. And so you're going to have x times 2x plus 5 plus 1 times 2x plus 5. So we can actually combine that, sort of refactor that entire thing, because the greatest common factor of x times 2x plus 5 and 1 times 2x plus 5 is 2x plus 5. So in that case, we get 2x plus 5 times x plus 1, and I just have that written in a different order right here. So our final step is actually optional, but I highly recommend it, especially if you're getting started, and that is just to check your work. Checking your work with factoring works really well because all you have to do is expand what you've just written, and if you get the same answer you originally started with, you know you did it right. So in this case, I'm just going to multiply x plus 1 times 2x plus 5. First of all, multiply x times 2x, then we get 2x squared. Then I'm going to multiply x times 1 times 2x, and then I'm going to get 2x. After that, I'm going to multiply x times 5, so to get 5x, and then finally 1 times 5 to get 5. And then you can just add together like terms, so in this case, after we do that, we get 2x squared plus 7x plus 5. And as you guys can tell, that's what we started out with, which is really cool that this actually worked. It's a lot easier than other ways that I've been taught how to factor these more difficult equations to factor. But let's move on to our second example. This one is going to be a little bit harder, but still very manageable. So this time we're doing 3x squared plus 12x plus 15. We're going to do it the same way in the same steps. So our first step is, as always, to multiply a times c. So in this case, a is 3. Remember, that's the number in front of x squared. And c is the number at the end that doesn't have any x's. That's negative 15. And 3 times negative 15 is going to be negative 45. Our step 2 is to find our two numbers that we're going to split b into. And remember, they have to add to b and multiply to the number we got in step 1. So this one is a little bit harder. But I find it easiest to think of all the different factor pairs that multiply to our number that we're trying to multiply to, which in this case, again, is negative 45. So just starting out, simply 1 times 45, or negative 1 times 45 in this case because it's negative, that definitely doesn't add to 12. But what if we go to the next pair, which is going to be 3 times 15, and one of those is going to have to be negative because we have negative 45. The negative times the positive is always going to be negative. So in this case, we can find out that if we make 3 the negative number, that's going to add to 12. 3 times negative 3 plus 15 is 12. So we've just found our two numbers. So next, moving on to step 3. For this step, we're going to split up the b term into these two numbers we got last time. And again, we got 15 and negative 3. So we're going to have 3x squared minus 3x plus 15x minus 15. And the cool thing about MARFing is that no matter what order you write your two numbers in, it's still going to work. So you could do minus 3x plus 15x or plus 15x minus 3x. So our fourth step is going to be to factor. So in this case, we are going to, again, factor into two parts. So for 3x squared and negative 3x, the greatest common factor is 3x. So we're going to get 3x times x, because 3x squared is 3x times x, minus 1, because 3x times negative 1 is negative 3x. And then for the second part, we're trying to find the greatest common factor of 15x and negative 15, and that is going to be 15. So we're going to get 15 times x minus 1, because 15 times x is 15x, and 15 times minus 1 is negative 15, and that's just a great way to factor our four numbers. So finally, for step 5, we're going to combine, and again, the really cool thing about MARFing is that you're going to get, in the parentheses, always going to get the same number if you did it right. So in this case, our number is x minus 1. That's the greatest common factor of these two different parts of this equation we have, 3x times x minus 1 and 15 times x minus 1. So we get 3x plus 15 times x minus 1. And step 6 is just going to be to check our work. So we're going to do 3x plus 15 times x minus 1 just to make sure that we did it right. And I'm not going to bore you with expanding this because you guys should already know that. But basically we did do it right. And checking your work again is great with factoring because it's super easy to check your work when you're factoring. So on a test, it's really easy to tell if you made a mistake and go back and fix your work. But I want to thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really appreciate your support. And if you made it all the way through, you're a true fan, I guess. So if you like the video, make sure to comment down below what video you want next. And if anyone has any suggestions, I'll be sure to make that video. But other than that, thanks so much for watching. I'll try to make a video next week about more basic ways of factoring, and I'll see you then. And if you thought this video was interesting, make sure to link my other math videos down below so you can go check those out.